وَالدَّارُ الْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ
وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة
فيقولوا هل نحن منظرون.
Have you ever listened to the recitation of participants in an international competition for the Noble Qur'an?
وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا.
Have you not noticed the consistency in their recitations and that there is no difference in its letters, vowels or rules?
لِلَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا عِندَ رَبِّهِمْ جَنَّاتٌ تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ.
How could it be like that, even though among them are Arabs and non-Arabs, young children and adults, as well as people from East and West? How come that they have all memorized the Noble Qur'an and during their recitation pronounce it in exactly the same way? And how did the Noble Qur'an remain preserved with such precision, although it was sent down more than 1,400 years ago? How did it remain preserved in the chests of memorizers in spite of the closeness in the articulation points and qualities of the letters that might cause confusion among them, resulting in the changing of words and meanings? How could it reach us just in the same way it was revealed, in spite that non-Arabic language were common amongst Muslims and many of them did not master Arabic? And also, how could it reach us even though the enemies have assailed one another against the Muslim Ummah over several periods of time in the past and modern history, and despite the weakness and disgrace that have befallen Muslims? This shows us the might of Allah, the Almighty, the Most Exalted, He who promised to preserve His speech. It is certainly we who will preserve it, and it occurred just as He wished. Thus, how can it be distorted by human forces? To understand it very well, let's take a tour in the early centuries. When the Qur'an began to be revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, the heaven was guarded with shooting stars. As a result, the jinn could not eavesdrop as they used to do before. They no longer had positions in heaven to eavesdrop what is destined to happen on earth, so that the revelation of the Qur'an was not confused with the lies of the jinn or their divination or falsehood. Then when Gabriel, peace be upon him, was coming down to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, with the Qur'an, the Prophet used to move his lips reciting the verses during the revelation to implant the verses in his heart so he would not forget them. Allah Mighty and Majestic drew his attention to the fact that words you are receiving are not like any others, and it is our responsibility to preserve them in your heart. Move not Muhammad your tongue with it to hasten with recitation of the Qur'an. Indeed, upon us is its collection in your heart, and to make it possible its recitation. So when we have recited it through Gabriel, then follow its recitation. Then upon to us is its clarification to you. Because of these verses, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, would focus on listening to the recitation of Gabriel when he brought down a revelation. Having finished and set out, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, would recite the verses as he received them, never missing anything of it. Through this way of teaching recitation, the companions received it orally from the mouth of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and they would recite it back to him to learn from him the correct recitation until he would approve their way of recitation. Subsequently, the companions delivered it to the following generations, the Tabi'un, in the same manner, and so forth. Each generation was teaching the following one the correct and fluent way of reciting the Qur'an orally. Thus, what is the way of the teaching Qur'an recitation that became the reason for the survival of phonic transmission of the Qur'an exactly as it was during the first generation of Islam? Allah Mighty and Majestic assigned a special way to reciting Qur'an. It is not recited like common speech, but it should be recited properly in a measured way and following the rules of tajweed. That's why one of the primary concerns of the teacher of the Qur'an recitation centuries of Islam to the present day has been to rectify his students' tongue to correctly pronounce the Qur'an as it was revealed, and it is not enough only to depend on reading from the Mus'haf, from the copy of the Qur'an. The student's tongue was to be trained to be able to read the Qur'an correctly as it was transmitted from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, generation after generation to the present day. And amongst the basic points that were taken into consideration by Qur'an teachers are the articulation points and qualities of letters. This was their prime concern more than anything everything else, because they realized that any slight deviation in pronouncing letters or vowels that day would increase bit by bit over the course of time, and finally the latter will turn into another letter and the vowel into another one. Through this, distortion and change will find their way into the Noble Qur'an out of the blue. They also paid special attention to the letters which are united or near in their articulation points, and to the letters which are distinguished from each other with one quality. Thereby, if the reciter failed to differentiate between them, the letter would be changed to another one, such as ta and ta, or tha and dhal, or sin and sad. You can just imagine how much distortion will infect a word and its meaning if these letters are confused with each other. That was not the end. Scholars crowned these great efforts in preserving the phonic transmission of the Quranic text through their extensive care to write books for explaining the voice performance of the Quran. These are the books of the science of tajweed, the rules of Quranic recitation. In these books, they precisely elaborated in detail everything related to the articulation point of each letter and its characteristics that distinguish it from other letters. They explained the rulings of letters when they clusters with each other, such as merging, ghunna, nasalization, and hiding. They also dealt in detail with the cases of imala, diphthongization, its causes and rulings. They also explained the med, the lengthening, and its types. Furthermore, the scholars wrote works on the science of al-waqf wal-ibtida, pausing and beginning, in which they explained how to stop at the Quranic words and how to start with them, and even where the reader should stop and from where he can initiate his recitation, so as not to distort the meanings of the Quran by his stopping and starting.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Have you ever seen or heard of such an accuracy, or even something near to it in transmitting any text in the whole history of mankind? And beyond all this, Allah Mighty and Majestic has facilitated memorization of the Quran in the hearts. Allah Mighty and Majestic says, and we have certainly made the Quran easy to remember.
وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ.
Therefore, it was memorized by children who did not reach the age of 10, and by elderly people who are above the age of 60 and 70, and by Arabs who are fluent in pronouncing the letters of the Quran, and by non-Arabs who knew nothing of Arabic. What is more astonishing is that Allah Mighty and Majestic made it easy to memorize for people who are suffering from mental deficiency, as has become widespread and well known. Thus, how did this happen? It is the miracle of "It is certainly we who will preserve it." It is Allah's proof against His creation and His care for His final message to them, so that His argument remains valid against them, and that His light, which is guiding to Him, remains radiating among them. And this is sufficient as a sign for Allah and for His glory and perfection. Thus, praise be to Allah who completed the blessing upon Muslims by preserving their book, the source of their glory, the spring of their hearts, the light of their chests, and the removal of their sorrows, worries, and anxieties.
Haseen Center for Research and Studies, Safety and Reassurance.